The Stovepipe Bluff by Howard Andrew Jones. If he hadn't known them for what they were, Ash might have thought the flak clouds and the tracer fire that lit them lovely. He saw the splash of reds and oranges over Hanson's shoulders as they stepped up to that opening to the night, and it reminded him of the 4th of July. But it was a fleeting impression, countered by the rush of anxiety and fear that swept through him as Hanson dropped into the sky and the jumpmaster shouted at Ash to go. It wasn't like one of the training flights. He didn't wait for the slap on his shoulder because he wanted out of the plane. He hurried to the door and stepped into the air. The transport plane's roar was instantly drowned by the thunder of AAA and the rattle of machine gun fire. He'd never felt such a massive prop blast. It whipped him hard to the left. The motion ripped his leg bag free of its rope and sent it plunging into the darkness over Normandy. There went half his ammo and most of his food. There was no time to worry about that, because even though he'd felt his chute fill, the blackened ground was coming up fast. He was startled. How long had the plane been flying? He tugged on his risers and lifted his feet, but even then his boots brushed the top of a tree. He cleared it, and the chute dropped him into what looked like a fallow farm field. He wondered what was usually grown there, even as he heard machine gun fire from somewhere very close. Had the Germans seen him? If so, there was nothing he could do about that yet. A moment later, Ash was on the ground, scarcely conscious of the landing itself. The clean scent of the soil filled his nostrils, an incongruous reminder of home, even if there was a slightly different tang in the air. Not far off, German voices yelled that there were more over there, and they might have meant him. He cut the chute free faster than he'd ever managed in practice, tore off his life preserver, and ditched his reserve chute. As the shooting continued, he hugged the ground and crawled for the tree line, half expecting a bullet in the back. If the Germans had heard his scramble through the dirt, there was no sign, and soon he was sitting with his back against a tree trunk, putting his M1 together. He felt better with it in his arms, and as he sat listening, the machine gun fired another short burst. Maybe it wasn't him that they'd spotted. Where was he? There certainly weren't any landing lights or trumpet signals, as the officers had promised. From how fast he'd come down, he guessed he'd dropped from only 300 feet or so, a lot lower than planned, and if the force of that prop blast was any sign, the C-47 had been moving pretty fast. Most likely, then, he was further inland. And, as quickly as the plane was speeding along, most likely the rest of his stick was scattered pretty far. He checked the faintly luminous arrow on his wrist compass and discovered north was pretty much straight towards where the machine gun nest seemed to be. Not that that direction helped him much without knowing where he was. Rifle in hand, Ash took in the surroundings. He'd taken refuge in a little tangle of woods that sloped towards a creek he could hear babbling in lulls between the flak gun bursts. That could be one of several creeks he'd seen on the sand tables. He'd caught a glimpse of a distant church steeple on his way down, but he'd been too worried about the tracer fire in the tree to orient himself well. Returning his attention to the field where he'd landed, he saw the dark shape of a farmhouse more than a half-mile west. The field stretched south until it stopped at a hedgerow, and to his north it faded into a darkness in which he was fairly certain the Germans were hiding. Smiling wryly, he supposed that the Germans were hiding just about everywhere. As if in an effort to reassure him of their location, the Germans cut loose with a machine gun burst, until a non-com shouted to stop firing at nothing. From the harsh tone, Ash guessed he might have known what the shouting was about even if he hadn't known any German. The tone of a non-com dressing down a soldier was apparently universal. Ash figured the gunner to be only 200 yards or so distant. Maybe they were guarding a crossroads or set up in a French farmhouse. He just decided that the best way to move out would be to go deeper into the woods, away from the gun, when he heard muted splashing. Someone was trying to pick his way stealthily through the water, probably more than one. Ash slid the safety off his M1 and eased through the close-packed trees. He stopped when the trees opened up and the ground dropped steeply towards a little rivulet, only a little more than 2 feet across. 2 figures were picking their way in the direction of the German machine gun nest. There was no mistaking them for Krauts. He could see the outline of their helmets. He reached up with one hand and clicked the cricket around his neck. Both men froze and crouched. The first one was carrying an M1. The second had a bazooka strapped to his back and was holding a pistol. Could it be Hanson? He'd been carrying a bazooka. Both soldiers nervously turned their heads to the left and right, but neither of them made a move to sound off. Damn, that was weird. Ash clicked the cricket again. Both soldiers shifted towards him, and the soldier with the bazooka reached up to his neck and pressed his clicker twice. "There's a machine gun nest up there," Ash whispered down. "We heard," the one in front said, a little too clearly for Ash's comfort. He had a southern drawl that identified him immediately to Ash as a member of his own stick, Eddings. "We're heading to take it out." Eddings sounded utterly confident, but then he always had been, maybe a little too much. "Is that you, Ash?" "It's me. Is that Hanson with you?" "Hell yeah," said the mild-voiced man with the bazooka. "Welcome to Normandy," Eddings drawled. Ash checked up and down the creek.